sorry for the delay.
Iron.
Hi.
I think everybody was able to get in. So I'm just going to do a quick visual roll call here. Are we waiting for Bob Weisbord? No, he's here.
I'm here.
Okay. So great. Thank you all. All right. I will call to order the Wednesday, May 5th meeting of Narberth Borough Council. It is 7:36 p.m. and I will call the roll. Mr. McGreevy.
Here.
Ms. Pananopoulos.
Here.
Rickards.
Here.
Jax.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Mr. Weisbord.
Here.
Here.
Present.
Mr. Weisbord, myself, Aaron Muterick, and Mayor Deutsch.
Here.
All right. We are going to move our executive session towards the end of this meeting. So ignore agenda item 3, and we will have one before we adjourn, and then we will not come back into public session to make any decisions following the executive session. I have no specific comments. Ms. Mayor, do you have anything?
Just a couple reminders. We've had some complaints about people driving a little fast in the borough. Just remind that the top speed limit in the borough is 25. Please mind your pedals and keep to the speed limit. Also, we've had a couple of complaints of people bypassing bus stops with the flashing lights and the stop signs. And just a reminder, it's a big, huge fine if you get caught ignoring school buses that are stopped, and it is not worth getting wherever you're trying to go 2 seconds faster. So please mind the school buses, stop when you're supposed to stop, and let's take care of each other and make sure everybody gets where they're going safely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6, subdivision and land development. Could I call on you, Mr. Bressi, to give us a summary of both of these plans? We'll start with 230 Dudley Avenue. Mr. Bressi? All right, I'm going to text Todd, but
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Oh, great.
I was
Thank
getting my papers.
I understand. We're moving quickly. Could you give us a summary of the proposed development at 230 Dudley?
It is not a proposed development.
The land development or subdivision plan.
It is simply a subdivision proposal. This is currently a single-family house, which sits on an oversized lot. I believe informally the applicant had explored tearing down the house and replacing it with 2 houses, but there were informal conversations with some members of the Planning Commission who expressed concern about the demolition of the house for that reason. And the applicant now is proposing to subdivide the property into 2 lots, but to keep the existing house and then to potentially create a lot that could be developed for a second house. In order to make that work, the applicant is proposing to demolish a room on the side of the house. My understanding, and I believe the applicant's here and they could clarify that if you'd like, is that is not part of the original house. It was added later, and that when they demolished this addition, the existing or the original stone wall of the house would then remain the exterior wall of the house. Secondly, in order to create a lot that has the minimum size to be built on, the applicant is proposing to have a subdivision line which runs perpendicularly from the street, but then maybe about 2/3 of the way through the lot, jogs into the adjacent property of the existing house. And the reason for that is if the line went straight, the newly created lot would not have enough square footage to allow for the construction of a house. And so by jogging the line, they make the lot big enough to allow for the construction of a house based on the number of square footage, the number of square feet that is required. Because of that, this subdivision application requires a waiver from our subdivision and land development ordinance, which generally seeks for lot lines to be straight and to be perpendicular from a street. The Planning Commission is very wary of granting this waiver. We always balance the public purpose of doing that versus the request. In this case, the Planning Commission found that the public purpose of saving this house, preventing it or allowing it to remain and not be demolished is very important to the borough. That's something people are very sensitive to now. And therefore, the adjustment of the lot line to allow for a second buildable lot was in the public interest, and therefore the Planning Commission recommended that the Borough Council approve this waiver. The Planning Commission also was encouraged because the applicant will be complying with stormwater requirements that apply to properties in this area of the borough, and will be consulting with the Shade Tree Commission about its landscape plan. So those potential impacts of stormwater and loss of tree coverage would be reviewed more thoroughly by the borough. So for all those reasons, the Planning Commission recommended the approval of the subdivision and the granting of the waiver.
Okay, thank you. Council, questions for Mr. Bressi?
Todd, can I ask in the MCPC letter, I mean, the letter reference says they're generally supportive of this and only cite the landscaping concerns. Was there anything else that MCPC really agreed with concerns with the lot or the waiver? Or was it really just the lack of, I believe there was not a landscaping plan submitted?
I believe that was it. I mean, landscaping interplays with the provision of street trees, and I think MCPC was concerned that the street tree sections of the code would be followed as well. But I think that was largely it.
Okay.
There was a community concern about stormwater management. The applicant went to great lengths to explain how stormwater would be managed on that site, and offered to stay in touch with the people who came to the meeting to discuss that matter as the project evolved. There's concern that development of this site could potentially increase runoff to adjacent properties. That was concern the community expressed.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think it's tragic that we have this house. Like, thank God it's hopefully being saved, but the loss of that green space is upsetting.
So I don't believe there are any other MCPC concerns, and that was the major concern expressed in public comment.
Thank you.
Any questions for the developer? I'm assuming that's you, Mr. Sposato.
It is, yes.
All right, well, hearing none, this will come onto the agenda at our business meeting for approval. Let's talk about 32 Sabine, Mr. Bressi. I think we discussed this previously. Am I correct? This is the triplex being replaced by a duplex in the proposal?
Yes. Yes, it is. So this is on Sabine Avenue. It appears from the street, the existing building appears to be like a suburban colonial house, but actually it's divided into 3 units. And the proposal is to subdivide this into 2 units into a twin. This is unlike 230 Dudley. That was the first time we had reviewed it Monday. This is at the preliminary phase, the second time we've reviewed this project. So for the most part, it's already been approved in terms of its zoning conformance. And now at this stage of the process, we are looking at more details, particularly stormwater management and landscaping again. So you would have seen this already, and you would have voted to approve the general subdivision and land development approach. The issues that arose at our meeting had to do with the stormwater management. The borough engineer had requested that some of the calculations be redone or corrected, that more work needed to be done simply on providing the data that would allow for a determination that the stormwater management would indeed comply with the code. Secondly, there was concern as well about the landscaping plan. There are, I believe, 3 large trees in the front of this property right now, all of which would be removed in order to accommodate the new development, one of which, I believe I'm correct about that. If I'm mistaken, I hope they'll correct me. One of the trees, the applicant is reported as declining and unhealthy and would probably need to be removed anyway. The Planning Commission asked for that to be verified by an arborist. A tree closest to the house is healthy, to the new house is healthy, but the applicant said that it would need to be taken down because of the disturbance of the construction would likely, or quite possibly, let's say, create damage to the tree, and therefore it would be taken down. One planning commissioner suggested alternative approaches to building foundations that might save the tree. The ultimate outcome of that was that the applicant agreed to consult with the Shade Tree Commission about all of the trees on the property, which trees were being taken down, and what strategy would be that the applicant would follow to replace the trees as per our ordinance, and how the requirement for street trees, which is separate, would be met. So those are 2 big questions right now, the stormwater management and the street trees. The third issue that needs to be resolved is the provision of easements. This property would be accessed from Country Lane across an adjacent property. And since as it is now, it currently is accessed from Country Lane across an adjacent property. And then because the twin would be on 2 different properties, there would have to be an easement between those 2 properties. The applicant is still researching the easement that currently exists. Apparently there are some issues with the easement area and the area that's actually paved, and trying to ascertain whether that easement or a new easement. So the easement matters need to be resolved as well. The final issue is that there's one zoning calculation that we questioned. You might recall in the zoning amendment that was finally passed in January, we adjusted the rules slightly in regard to the maximum facade size of a new house or a new building. In general, the facade size of a new building can only be 115% of the average facade size of the other buildings on that block. That's a generalization, but that's generally how it works. One of the amendments to the zoning ordinance removed a table that had been in the zoning ordinance that provided a reference for what the average was on each block. That had been incorporated in the original zoning code. We learned upon investigation that data was not, that table was not calculated correctly, and some of the data was unreliable. And so to avoid harm to the borough, that table was removed from the ordinance, and applicants are now required to perform those calculations on their own. It appeared to the Planning Commission that the applicant in making this calculation relied on that table. when they should have done the calculation on their own. So therefore, we asked the applicant to verify that data, where it came from. And if they did take that data from the table, to independently calculate what that factor would be. So that also needs to be addressed, and the applicant agreed to do that. So those are 3 or 4 outstanding matters. I think that all but the easement should be addressed before there is an approval of the preliminary plan, and therefore the Planning Commission tabled this application with the applicant's agreement to that, so that the applicant can work on these issues and come back next month and hopefully resolve all those issues so that we can consider voting on the application.
Mr. Sposato, you are the developer for 32 Sabine as well?
That's correct.
Your body language, okay. Okay, well, any questions from council members? Mr. Bush?
Sure. So what happens if the facade calculations are wrong and the facade is too big as currently designed?
Either, gentlemen?
If
or
first of all, the
Mr.
calculations could show that the facade is too big, or it could mean that they're in conformance with the code. We don't know, to be honest with you. We don't really know which way we go. But if facade were too big, obviously the facade would have to be redesigned so that it is in conformance with the code.
Everyone seems to be in agreement.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
That doesn't change our process at all. I mean, the process is still the same. It's just going to, be slightly modified. All right.
Yeah, it's more of a clarification than anything else. So we're, working with the borough to do it correctly.
Any other questions for either Mr. Bressi or Mr. Sposato or Mr. Yan? All right, thank you, gentlemen. We will move on to 7A. Mr. Bressi, it says none here on the agenda, but I would like to take the opportunity to discuss the historic district ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. You are putting me through my paces today.
I am.
Counting on that executive session to get ready. I said, oh, great, I got 45 minutes. They probably have some meaty matters to discuss. So first of all, thank you, Mr. President, for putting this on the agenda this evening. And thank you to the council for having the opportunity to talk with you about this this topic again. I think it was probably just 2 months ago that we had a work session about this topic. Over the weekend, I sent to you a draft ordinance to create a historic district in Narberth, or process for creating a historic district in Narberth. I also, as I always do, posted my transmission to the council on the Planning Commission section of the webpage on Monday, so that is now available to the public to review. I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is the result of really several years of work in trying to understand what different kinds of policies the borough could implement to build on its form-based code to preserve the character of the community. The overall policy goal, of this, as with the form-based code, is to manage the changes that naturally occur in a community in a manner that reflects the traditional character of the community as well as possible. I mean, our community was built 100 years ago, so obviously we're not building houses the same way. But what we would very much like to do through our zoning code and other mechanisms is to make sure that basic things like the form and the pattern and the scale of new things are generally reflective of what's already here. And one of the important accomplishments of the form-based code was really to shift the playing field so that there were many more opportunities for people to renovate their houses, to expand their houses than in the former zoning code without running into problems with variances or extra investments. A classic story is whenever someone wanted to put an addition on their house, they'd have to add 2 parking spots to their lot to conform to the code. So the form-based code really tried to tip things to give people the ability to build that extra bedroom when their family got too big, because we wanted to preserve the character. I don't think anyone imagined 4 or 5 years ago when we worked on that, that the selling price for a house in Narberth would be $1.3 million. We just didn't. And so now the incentives for change are much stronger than they were when we passed the form-based code. And in a way, reshift the balance towards people having an incentive simply to tear down houses so they can build something big and new. So as we began to see that happening, we began to work on a process to build on the form-based code to give the borough more tools to manage the rate of change and the kind of change that would occur. And that's really looking through the tools, which are generally called historic preservation. In 2019, the State Historic Pennsylvania Museums and Historic Commission, the Lower Merion Conservancy, and the Commission collaborated on a study which involved a bit of public process and concluded that the borough would be interested in, the community would be interested in a very high level type of historic district or preservation, which really gave the borough the ability to manage big changes to the fabric, like demolitions of houses, new construction of houses, major additions to houses, changes that really affected the feel of things from the street. There did not seem to be an interest in what the kinds of preservation that are typically thought of as historic preservation. Managing the design of windows or the color of things or the kinds of shutters you're allowed to put on your house. That's not something that Narberth seemed to be interested in. So building on that, for about the last 2 years, the Planning Commission's been working with the Conservancy and the state to develop a ordinance for Narberth that reflected that community desire. We were delayed a bit because we were waiting for the state Museum and Historic Commission to develop a model ordinance that we could build on. Rather than invent a whole new ordinance ourselves, we waited until about last fall when the state was actually able to give us a model ordinance that we could then tweak for Narberth's purposes. So that is what we have provided to you. That's the background of how we got to where we are. Before I talk about the ordinance itself, I'd like to talk about what else we have to do. This ordinance generally sets out a process. It explains how a historic district could be created and how it could be managed. It does not create a historic district. It does not actually begin the implementation of a historic district. That would have to be a separate action, another action, which would be the creation of a map that actually shows where the district is, shows what properties are within it. It would also involve the creation of a board to manage that. So this is the first of several steps that we have to take. We're advised by the State Historic Preservation Office that it's good to get this done first to make sure the processes are sound and that they meet our own particular needs before we seek to have a map created or approved, because it's good just to break the decision-making in two parts. It's good to have the structure in place and then figure out what the map is really going to be, because the map might depend on different kinds of input that we get. All of that, the map at least, I'm sorry, then when the borough has approved it, that then needs to go to the State Museum and Historic Commission for approval before it can be considered activated, so to speak. So we take our work and we bundle it up and we give it to the PMHC, which then determines whether or not it's consistent. It's consistent with the state historic preservation law under which authority this has been drafted. So that's what happens next. We're still several steps and a number of months away from actually having a complete package. But this, of course, is a very important threshold. So that's an overview of where we've come, where we are, and where we need to go next. The Planning Commission is asking the council for feedback on this ordinance, with the hope that with one more round of feedback from council, we can prepare a final ordinance that you can consider advertising for adoption. We realize you're going to have questions about this. There are, there are things already in here that I know some council members have hard questions about, and so we'd like to get final guidance about how to make final changes to this and give you a version that you are comfortable advertising and considering for a vote. So that's hopefully some of the discussion we can have. So I'd be happy to kind of go through the ordinance. I think that would probably be really useful, but at this point I'll stop to ask the president if it would be good to entertain questions, if that would be a good thing to do, or how would you like to proceed from here?
Well, I'm going to look to the council to help drive that conversation. How would people like to proceed from here? Do you have specific questions, or would just like more of an overview? Councilor Elshax?
Well, I have a quick question. I know a few months back, there was a discussion in the Planning Commission about a loophole that had been used by developers to, put in homes with, some of these tear downs and new large homes. Would this ordinance help to deal with some of those issues? Or no?
I will be honest.
Is that a completely separate issue? I'm just wondering. I don't know.
No. First of all, I will be honest with you. I don't recall specifically what you're referring to. The word loophole came up a lot at our Planning Commission meeting Monday, members of the public, and I tried to explain that we don't really have loopholes as much as whenever you try to write a zoning code to apply to an existing town that is as quirky and as idiosyncratic as Narberth, there's bound to be places where the code doesn't quite fit. And that's where, people will find gaps and try to do things. So, and council member, we are constantly trying to identify those and fix those, irregardless of anything else we're talking about tonight. That is a constant part of our work program. That's why we asked for, your support of the ordinance that you passed in January. We already have a work plan for a new round of changes to do, much of which we've discussed with council. In fact, we've received your instructions from last month about things to look at. So that's a constant process. However, this would address that issue in a very straightforward way, which is that this ordinance would prevent the demolition or tearing down of a house, except in the case of economic hardship, essentially.
Okay.
So, for example, 230 Dudley, which we just saw, they would have been, in order to have begun with their original plan to tear down the house and subdivide and build two, they would have had to demonstrate an economic hardship, not just that it's good economically, they'd actually have to demonstrate a hardship. If you use the standard that people can maximize their return on their property, then people would come and propose anything and say, well, I can maximize return by doing that. So codes obviously limit that. So what this ordinance would do is say you can do a tear down if there's an economic hardship, or in a case of public safety, a public hazard, things like that. So at 230 Dudley, they would have immediately, rather than proposing to tear the house down, they would have immediately looked to solutions to find ways to build on that lot. And I should say, council member, concurrently with this, one of the items on our work plan is to look at ways to provide more flexibility for property owners who have a historic house on a big lot to subdivide and make use of a potential subdivision lot. Because this comes up all the time. It's come up at 146 Marion. It came up on Chestnut, I think, a few months back, where we've had to kind of think about ways of helping people find paths to keep their house while recognizing their right to develop other parts of their property. So this would tip the scales very far in the direction of having people find solutions that do not involve tearing down economically viable houses. So it would. It's a long answer, but it would address that. Yes.
Mona, do you have a follow-up or go ahead?
No, it's a really helpful answer. Thank you. Thank you for all your work.
Other council members, questions? Mr. McGreevy.
Todd, thank you. I wanted to ask about the map and the historic district. I know that's a step in the future, but I was just looking at the definition in the ordinance. It looks like a historic district is defined by a certain concentration of historic buildings.
Well,
I mean, would it have to be, could a single property be exempted from the district, or would it be an entire neighborhood?
yeah. So I'm happy to dig into that for a minute, council member. So what defines a historic district? That's really the beginning point in the answer. A historic district is defined, has to be kind of characterized by a couple of possible things. And those criteria, I'm quickly trying to look here, are listed on page 5, section 5B, under designation criteria. There are 6 different potential criteria. And then remember, this is a boilerplate that we've adapted. The criteria that's really most relevant to Narberth is representative of broad patterns of development, heritage, or culture of the borough of Narberth, Commonwealth, or nation. And so that has to be defined in some way. Like, so what is that? And if you look at the Heritage Action Study that was, completed in the fall of 2019, that provides a definition that the heritage of Narberth is a town that was built at a certain time of history for certain types of people, roughly from around the turn of the century to mid-century, say like 1900 to 1945. And it is that concentrated era of development that tells the special story of Narberth. There's some things before, and yes, that's important, and there's a lot after. But the district would really be concentrated around that early history of Narberth, when it was really growing to the point where it's just about built out. And that would cover almost everything except for some of the more recent cul-de-sac developments that kind of sprouted off Wynwood Avenue and Montgomery Avenue. Now, within that district, obviously, not everything tells that story. I mean, you could probably think of any block and there's some house that was built in the 70s or, looks like it could be in some other township than Narberth. The district would have within it what are called contributing resources and non-contributing resources. And one of the steps that we would have to do in making that map is go house by house and determine, is that house a contributing resource? Is it part of that narrative that we all know to be Narberth from 1900 to 1945? Or is it some sort of anomaly that happened later? This historic district ordinance would only apply to houses that are contributing, buildings that are contributing. Would not apply to buildings that are non-contributing, at least in the sense that changes would have to get a certificate of appropriateness. So even within the district and within that story, certain houses are removed because they're not part of that story. And that's the next step that we have to do. We have to draw the boundary around where that story is told, and then go through and say, is this house in? Is this house out? Is this house in? Is this house out?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I just have more of a comment than a question. Todd, this is such an amazing amount of work. And really, thank you. I'm really excited about this. And just want to comment is, one, I really appreciate how you built in education of the public in this, because I think that's incredibly important for people to understand. And even you just giving the context in a public meeting of saying, who could have anticipated when you worked on the form-based zoning that we would have houses going in 24 hours for $1.4 million, for example, or that a pandemic would radically shift the housing market in Narberth. So I appreciate that you put in that educational piece and that you really kind of outline the membership of the HARB. You really set this up to have a diverse set of experiences and perspectives. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I will point out the core membership of the HARP, that is a requirement of the state law to have that kind of membership, like a real estate professional, a building professional.
Yeah, we'll just give you credit for it though.
Sure, I'll take it. We'll take it.
So Todd, I had a couple questions. First, I was looking at that process of determining contributing versus non-contributing, and it's a little sparse, the description of how that's going to happen. So that would be part of the next piece of legislation, would be a more specific determination.
Yes. So what goes into that? I mean, the key thing that would go into that, council member, would, I mean, the starting point would really be, to ascertain from public records when the house was built, right? I mean, that's one of the key markers of whether it's part of that story of Narberth or not. So that's research that will get assistance from our team at Montgomery County Planning Commission on.
Would there be an appeal if a property felt that they were not, this was redone in the 60s, it doesn't belong? How would that process work? If they feel they're non-contributing and they're marked as contributing.
So, first of all, one of the process steps is that every property owner within the district would be contacted and directly and told that about the district, and would be told about the planning. Under the code, the Planning Commission would have to hold a public meeting. It doesn't say public hearing, but a public meeting in which all affected property owners would be invited. It's interesting.
Sorry, who's holding that meeting? The Planning Commission or the HARP?
Well, at the very least,
it's a big meeting.
At the very least, the Planning Commission. You can always hold more meetings, right? The council could have a special meeting, but the Planning Commission is required to do that. So basically, a property owner can petition to, when there is a historic board, to have their property removed from the district or from being conforming, by simply providing documentation of why their property should be removed. And then it would, it would then be reviewed by the HARB, and since the district was created by council, ultimately council would have to have the final, say on whether that property should be removed or not.
All right. It just wasn't clear to me whether council had a final say at that step or not.
Well,
I think that makes sense.
So that's one of the things, council member, that's one of the kinds of feedback that are useful. So I'll make a note that we should make sure that process is clearly articulated in the ordinance. And I think anything council enacts by ordinance would then, if it's modified, council would have to modify, I would assume.
All right. And then the second concern I had was that our climate action plan asks us to ensure that any heritage, building preservation that we enact contains provisions for
Yes.
energy efficiency improvements and well, I don't know about energy generation, but things that would interface with our climate action plan. There's currently no real provision for taking that into account.
So actually, council member,
process, I would like that to be that a homeowner can bring a climate-related concern.
So this was one of the topics that we did discuss at the Planning Commission because of input that came from you and from others about this. So a couple of things to say. One is, remember the purview of the historic review is rather narrow compared to what you might think, observe in other communities. So many of the things that a homeowner might want to do in regard to energy conservation would never even come under the purview. However, based on the input we received, we added in the review criteria for alterations, we added a provision that says in considering whether or not to issue a certificate of appropriateness, the historic board must consider the benefit of proposed alterations on the energy efficiency of the structure, so that the value of making the change in order to meet the borough's sustainability or climate action goals has to be factored into its decisions. Now, I feel like if there's better language there, or if that can be strengthened, we'd be happy to do that. But I think based on the input we've received on that topic, that would clearly be the intent to not have this obstruct things that people want to do because they are, trying to improve the sustainability or energy efficiency of their houses.
Apparently, I totally missed that provision. I apologize.
No, that's okay. It's like 30 pages. I wouldn't expect you would have digested it all. But we're happy to build that. The message is we're happy to build that in. We tried, and if it's not good enough, we'll try again.
Okay. Other council questions? Ms. Mayor, maybe? Ms. Pananopoulos.
I guess this is the way of questions. So I'm curious to know what our next steps are. If this is just sort of a general discussion and where we're going from here. Todd, you already know what I'm going to say because I've been following this so closely for months. I think this work is incredibly important. I'm someone who 2 years ago would have said I am adamantly opposed to historic preservation and have become a convert for exactly the reason that you articulated, right? What we've seen happen is that market forces have made it such that many lots are more valuable, tearing down even perfectly lovely older starter homes. And the only tool that we really have, a strong tool, is to put in place historic preservation, so that we have a clear way to stop predatory teardowns and to sort of preserve the nice, small, older housing stock that exists. Totally on board with that. And I hear what you're saying, Todd. I get it. You're saying, many places, most places that have historic preservation regulate way more stuff, more activities, right, than this. And that is probably true. It might be true. I don't know. But again, I'm going to come back to the same question to start with, because I've asked this a lot of different ways to a lot of different people for a couple of years now, and I've never really had an answer. A lot of those places, they don't have form-based zoning codes, right? So they're using historic preservation to keep the basic form, right, of an addition or a new building or some alteration, right, within the basic scope, within the basic form, so it doesn't deviate too much. We already regulate maximum lot coverage, roof slope, right? You have a minimum roof slope you have to meet. We regulate building height. We regulate window ratios, right? You can't have all windows, all glass. You can't have no windows. You have to be similar to the existing, sort of classic architectural forms that we have. We have regulations of what entrances can look like, right? You have to have a porch, you have portico. You can't just have a door and nothing there. You can't stick a door on the side, right? You have to have a welcoming front porch. You have to have that. You'd already have to have that. We regulate facade size, right? To keep it within, as you already discussed earlier this evening, within 115% of the average on the block. So with all of those form-based regulations, I think that the number of activities that we are putting before the HARB under section 6D is still a lot more than we need. And because when somebody goes before the HARB, if you look at the timing, we're looking at like 30 days probably to get a meeting, and then 10 days for the report, and then it needs to go to council. Council will need to review that. That's possibly another 30 days. We're adding potentially 60, 70 days to somebody's process. Because of the required composition of the HARP, we need to have a building inspector. That's probably going to be the person that we pay to do our zoning and building inspection. That's going to add to the cost of permits. So I would really like to see probably half the stuff in section D not be under the mandatory sort of regime of the HARB, where a person's required to get a certificate of appropriateness. In contrast, back there in section 9, and I'm going to thank you, I'm going to thank the Planning Commission so much for developing this advisory review process, right? To go in parallel, to go side by side with the HARB. That is still going to add some time to permits. In fact, I'm going to talk about, I might ask you a question about that later, but it's not public, right? Council doesn't have to review it. It's not mandatory. It's just, you have to have it's a mandatory meeting. You need to get some guidance on your project, but ultimately you can go do what you want.
It's non-binding.
It's non-binding. I think what we're looking at, just for an example, if I look at section 60 and I see like adding, altering, removing, or concealing a porch column, post, or other vertical support. Do we really want to make somebody who has rotten porch posts and wants to replace them? Maybe they want to replace them with something steel and like modern looking. I've seen that done in North Narberth on some of those row homes. They look different. They look kind of cool. They like them. Do we really want to make that person have to go and demonstrate that deserves a certificate of appropriateness? Which frankly, if you're examining that from a historical perspective, it's probably not appropriate. If the goal here is to sort of make new stuff match the old stuff. And so I guess my question has always been, given that we have the form-based regulations, what exactly are we looking to have the HARB do other than stand in the way of demolishing, stand in the way of the erasure of our existing historic resources? But when it comes to altering them or making a small addition, third-story bump outs with dormers, I mean, they're all over the borough. People use this all the time to get a little bit of extra room on their third floor, because we already have these form-based regulations that will keep the volume of the building that's visible within certain parameters, that keep the roof slope, within a form that we're comfortable with. I don't see the point of adding the additional administrative burden and putting those kinds of projects to the HARB, particularly since we've developed this parallel advisory review process. So I would really like to see, and I'd like to hear how other council members feel about it. When I go down this list, I mean, almost half these things, I think that's covered by form-based zoning. That's covered by form-based zoning. Concealing a corbel, do we really need, somebody wants to conceal a corbel, they're not even taking it off. Do they really need to go and spend 60 days going before, various boards to get a certificate of appropriateness so they can conceal a corbel? I know it's less than some communities have, but I think for Narberth, I think we might, really consider just seeing if we can sort of distill that list just to the loss of buildings, essentially to demolition of a building, demolition of a significant part of a building, maybe, 50%, taking an entire floor off of an existing building. Those kinds of things that I think, I know universally, everybody I talk to in this borough supports that. I have never had anybody ask or suggest that they were looking for council to pass regulations so that they had to go get a certificate of appropriateness, or that their neighbor did in order to do something different with their house. Take off the ballast, the classic balustrades and replace them with something, that doesn't fit. It's Quaker or whatever, something that's not a different style from the building. And this is my concern, is that I think we don't really, I'd like to see if we can put those things within the advisory review process. So, I know you've had a lot of discussion about that on Planning Commission. We had discussion when I came, and there was discussion there, and you said you wanted to hear more from council. So now here we are with council, and I've put that out there, but I really want to hear other council members and how they feel about this. If I'm all alone, if then, I'll stop asking this, but I don't think that folks are going to be happy when they learn some of the projects that they're going to have to go through this process in order to do potentially. And I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, you can give that to administrative review. It's still requiring a certificate of appropriateness. It's still a mandatory, binding, burdensome process for something that I don't see the need for. Nobody has suggested that this is a problem we're having. We have a problem with losing some beautiful older homes altogether. But I've never heard anybody say we have a problem with, we have this pristine, it's historic district that's, people come to see it because all the buildings are the same, and it would be just terrible, it would be a real loss to put something different in the middle of it. We don't really have that. So I feel like I want to know if other council members have any thoughts like that when they read through the list in 6D and think about the reality of having to go through a public binding process to do some of these things. Are we comfortable with that? So that's my first thing. Then with respect to the advisory review process, I just wanted to ask you something, Todd, because
Michelle, can I just ask you, can you help me find the page you're referring to right now, just so I can look at it while you continue?
Numbered page
Because it's
9.
making really important points, and I want to follow the bouncing ball.
Page 9 is where the activities that would require a certificate of appropriateness for contributing resources are found.
Got it now. Thanks.
Okay.
So good interruption.
Michelle, can
No,
we?
no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You
We can talk about the
points before you go on to number 2.
Okay, all right,
Sure, absolutely.
all right. Before we move to the next point, other council members have thoughts on the points that Michelle has made here? Cindy?
Sure. Yeah, you made really good points. And quite honestly, I hadn't really kind of operationalized them, largely because we've never done anything incredibly major of our house. So that was really helpful to have you walk us through that example. I err on the side of I would rather be conservative and keep these 14 points and then adjust if we need to. I mean, we'll have the option to revise if need be.
Well, likewise, we could sort of start with just focusing on demolitions, which is the one thing I know everybody's unified on, and then this could be added to. If there's actually a problem arises where people are removing, core bolts and it's really creating a problem, then maybe we could think about regulating that with a mandatory public meeting.
Other council members, thoughts on this issue? Mr. Bush?
Yeah, this has been one of my concerns as well, Michelle, that, minor renovations leading to a long bureaucratic process. Perhaps, half as many projects going to the review committee might be an appropriate number. It might be a good benchmark for me. I agree.
Other council members? Mr. McGreevy?
Yeah, I would be interested in Todd Bressy's opinion. It does seem redundant, but I'm sure you have your own reason for making this list. Or could you imagine shrinking the list by half? Because
just hold that question and allow Mr. Weisbord to speak, and then we'll go back to Todd. Go ahead.
Michelle, I think you're making some of the same points that were made by members of the Planning Commission in the early days of the writing of the form-based code. Like sort of saying, at what point does zoning become overreach and you're actually beginning to regulate certain details about a person's home or alterations to their home. And I don't think, and so as I look at these, I almost think that we should have some kind of maybe a session to sit down and mark them up and discuss them each one in detail, and then present those to a planning commission to either respond to or discuss those with us, and then circle back to this discussion, because I think you're making really excellent points, and I think I'd be surprised that if the Planning Commission didn't already have this discussion, in a sense, they probably already addressed this issue, because always in Narberth, there have been people very sensitive about not wanting to be regulated when it comes to, say, the shape of their column or their balustrade. I think I think you're representing really well a very strong belief that's held by many people who live here, Michelle. And so I think that we should go through the list and really comb through it, and then have the Planning Commission have an opportunity to hear that feedback.
Okay. Anyone else? Cindy?
I agree. I mean, Bob, I think coming back, I'm definitely open to that. However, back to your point, Michelle, I would hate to see us delay this very important ordinance to save, again, something we all agree upon is preventing tear downs. I wonder if there is a way then to remove these, do what is most critical, and then go back to this page 9 and D. And again, I think I'm probably going to end up agreeing with you all. And it's just more a matter of process of like, let's get conservative. It's easier to walk stuff back. I am fine as long as we keep this moving. And I would support anything that that prevents these demolitions and tear downs, whatever process.
That's an interesting plan. Councilor Rickards, Councilor Weisbord.
Yeah, I want to just second what Cindy said about keeping this process moving forward, because I think we have a lot of common ground universally about the idea of preventing unnecessary tear downs. At the same time, Michelle, I want to just sort of like use an example for the purpose of discussion right now. Many years ago, there was a little storefront or a little building, a little sort of mixed use building on Forest Avenue that was stuccoed over. It was a beautiful little brick building, and had kind of a little tower over the stairwell. And the property owner took down the little tower, built sort of a very generic pediment across the top of the building, and then stuccoed over all the brick. And the brick was sort of like this really important historic material, and the tower was kind of a unique historic detail of the building. Actually, I think it might be the building. Hey guys, I'm on a Zoom call right now. I'm in a meeting.
That's the building where my
and the little building was, it's the little building actually, I think that Andrea has her store in now.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I just think that's kind of an example of, at some scale, the impact of, say, subtracting or altering a historic detail does begin to make a big impact on the town. But so like, yes, we might be talking about a handrail in one location, or like maybe just the porch column that could look good in a lot of different ways. But then we get to the certain scale where it's not really a tear down, it's not really a wholesale renovation, but it's like just enough to start to impact the general public's impression of the quality of the town. And so I think there's somewhere in there's like, we have to find, or the planning commission has to help us find what that balance point is. That's my comment.
I'll throw it back to Mr. Brassey. He's heard some thoughts. And tell us, Todd, what are you thinking? You're also on mute. We both have the same bug.
People like it when I'm muted, actually, Mr. President. You're lucky when I'm muted. Anyway, there were a lot of questions embedded in what Councilmember Panelopoulos was saying. One of them was, if we have the form-based code already, why do we need some of these things? That's because many of, if you imagine like a series of sieves, form-based code catches a certain number of things, but there are some things that fall through that sieve. And so we're trying to get to the next level of sieve. So for example, adding or removing towers or turrets or spires, those are the kinds of things that really, I think people would be very dismayed. I mean, everyone noticed when the roof of that one turret was replaced recently. So that's the difference between the code and what we're proposing here.
Can I ask you to elucidate that example? What did you think about the roof of that turret? Are you suggesting that that's something that would be questionable, shouldn't have been approved?
Oh, no.
If it had gone before a tar? Oh, you're saying it was noticeable, not that
noticeable. People
yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I think removing turrets and spires, I think, again, we're going for the easy stuff that nobody's going to really argue about, removing and erasing those unique resources.
I was going to address that question.
Definitely.
Actually. So, but that's the difference between the zoning code and this. This captures more things that are a little fine-grained or aren't new development. And so that's a difference. I mean, your question is the quintessential question, really. It's like, how far down do you go? And I think to assess your comments, I would try to kind of group these 14 things into kind of sort of levels of impact on the borough. And then it's a question of, is that level of impact so important that it should be regulated? Is it good public policy to take a look at that, or does it not really serve a public purpose? I mean, that's the essential. And I would probably break it down into a couple of clusters of things. There are the major moves like, tearing something down, or major additions, removing a building, towers, turrets, spires. And then there's another series of things like changing the roof, adding a dormer, taking a bay window off. Those are not things that are necessarily regulated by the form-based code, but as Councilmember Weisbord said, over time they do add. So like if you think about Wayne Avenue has the most lovely row, I believe, of houses with sleeping porches or something like that. And when you see those go, you notice it. People might not be coming to council saying, "Oh, that guy filled in his sleeping porch," or I'm not sure if that's what's on that block, but when it happens, you notice it. So
Right.
we've talked a lot about the planning commission as porches. When someone fills in their porch, you notice it.
No, but you can't do that under the form-based code. And I think
you can.
And I think that
within the
I think that when we're
second
talking about removing porches, I mean, I think that we're all going to be speaking the same language with removal of things.
So there's
that are
the second
significant.
layer of things that aren't about the big moves, but they're the next layer down of things that we do kind of notice, and they over either when they happen immediately or when they add up, they bother us. And then you get down to the next layer, which is the more fine-grained layer, which is concealing porch columns or posts. And arguably that layer may not be as important to the public. So I think you're right, council member. It's a matter of kind of balancing the cost of doing something versus the public impact. And I think we would be fine of looking at that and refining it. That's exactly the kind of feedback. I know you made those comments at our meeting, and we respected that, but I think the planning commission was genuinely interested in hearing what the other council members thought. And so now we've heard, right? And I think probably for council's ease, we might be able to represent it in a bunch of clusters, so it's more easy for you to see what we think the groups are. And so instead of like looking at each one, Mr. Weisbord, you could just say, that bottom cluster, maybe that's just not worth it. You know what I mean? We could probably make it a little easier for you in that regard. And then you could decide, what you ultimately read the community's, what you're hearing and what you think the community needs, and you can decide, ultimately which of the little clumps of things make the most sense. But I think that would probably be the best approach for us, is kind of refine the list structurally and maybe annotate it so you can understand why we've put things in certain places on that list. And then that might be easier for you then to make a decision about it.
So I have a question. Sorry.
I was going to suggest, I think we have a parallel path with the map, right?
Yeah.
We can do both at the same time now that we sort of have a framework. To Cindy's point, moving things along. Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and to go back to what you said, Cindy, I don't want to delay this. That's sort of the reason I've stayed as closely involved as I have, because I really wanted to try to keep the number of activities that we bring within this to just the ones that we are confident we have broad community buy-in, so that we don't get bogged up with opposition at the 11th hour, with people getting cold feet about this. I just wanted to make sure that we really keep focused on that. It's easy, and it's planning commission I heard diverse viewpoints expressed in the meeting I was at. It's not lockstep, and you have some very strong preservationists on the planning commission, and you have some folks who have different orientation. They have more of a urban planning orientation. So you have diverse voices there. And, I think that for strong historic preservation, it's very, very painful to listen to the things I'm saying now. These are deeply meaningful things, but I want to harken back to what Bob said, maybe 2 meetings ago, 2 months ago, I can't remember. I wish I could play back a recording of it because it was so eloquent, and I am not going to be able to do it justice, but you spoke very beautifully about your experience. You grew up in this area, about your sort of your experience of part of what's so beautiful and special and charming about Narberth is being able to sort of walk around and see all these oddball things that don't really fit, you know? There's just a lot of quirky things. And I think it's really important that we don't view historic preservation as that we don't allow it to become a way to sort of prevent that from continuing to be part of what makes Narberth Narberth. I'm concerned about including major additions, which seem to always be included in this as if that was just an assumption. But major additions are highly regulated by the form-based code already. And so it's hard for me to understand what they would be doing in here unless we were concerned about making them stylistically match what they were being added onto. You know, and I think that if we do that, we will, in addition to imposing a burden on people that I'm not sure has anything to do with our sort of our driving concern about preventing demolitions and tear downs, you know, I think that we risk sort of losing that quirky Narberth feel by allowing a group to sort of impose a set of style standards under the guise of historic preservations to new additions that folks put on their house. So I would also like to consider whether or not additions belong on that list. Again, you said it so well a couple of years ago, Todd, when we were talking about this, and you talked about how historic preservation ordinance could be something that's focused on preventing the erasure of history. So I'm not sure that I really agreed with that. That resonated with me. That made sense as a way to draw a distinction rather than the sieve analogy to distinguish between those things which erase existing, you know, historic resources and the story that already exists, versus things that seek to regulate new additions to make them match. So I think that that's another way that I would view it. In addition to the sieve, I think there are two things going on here. And then this is more of a technical. Can I just ask this question? Because this really is a question, just a straight out question about the advisory review board. Todd, can you speak to what the town, I think you referred to it as a town architect. It was in section 9 where we were talking about a staff member or a consultant who would be the designated individual that would hold the advisory review meetings. What's the planning commission's thought on what kind of person would need to serve that role? Would that need to be a compensated position? This is an extensive list of projects that could potentially go in for the advisory review.
Mm-hmm. So yes, it would be a design professional. And yes, our feeling is it should be a compensated position. We think that, I mean, we haven't really talked about a job description, but we, particularly because of the conversations about green building that have been going on, we think it needs to be someone who's not strictly a preservation architect, but someone who's kind of has a more broader sense of practice, and particularly someone who understands, you know, the nuances of materials and designs that are, you know, that people are trying to use to improve the efficiency or sustainability of their houses. I think, you know, I think what we would envision is almost no more like an hour session where someone comes in and shows the plan, and the architect says, well, you know, if you're interested in doing this, have you considered this material, or have you looked into this idea, or did you know you can go to this website and find these things? Mm-hmm. You know, I think, I don't think the notion is that this person would redesign every application. This really, the spirit of this is not regulatory or to kind of nudge people to conforming. It's more in the spirit of, I think what Council Member Rickards noted, in the spirit of education.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I love it. I just was wondering what kind of person we would need to be able to find.
Yeah.
And I, you know, in terms of the cost, this is a lot of projects we're starting off with, and already a list of 24, and there could be more, and might make sense maybe not initially, but over time, to have a way to provide for some of these things to even be advice that and education that's provided without a meeting. Things like, I don't know, installing non-wood siding and trim seems like it could be a printed, material that sort of gives advice on what some of the downsides of that are. So, I mean, but that's probably something that could be developed over time. But in general, I love this idea of creating an advisory review board that review, function that serves to educate folks in a non-binding way. So I appreciate all the work on that. Thanks for your information about that.
All right, thank you. So we've gotten a lot of information traveling between the two groups here, which I think is really positive. And I think we have a parallel path. Go back, get some chunking, some organization of some of these items, which is a request from council. Also, an opportunity to begin moving forward with, a map development, so we can start to understand it better. And I will work with Solicitor Walco in terms of when this may come, hone in terms of a time schedule of when this will come to council to adopt the ordinance, and then also the map would have a second approval, and we can start moving this forward.
May I add something about that, Mr. President?
Please do.
So as I noted to you, the state, the PMHC does not have to approve the ordinance that we put in front of you today. Obviously, the solicitor's role will be to ensure that it conforms to, state laws. And I've asked him to look particularly at administrative procedure provisions and to make sure that they have the right level of information, but not detail that could trip up the borough if something inadvertently went wrong. So I've asked him to look at that. The PMHC will have to approve the map, and they meet 4 times a year to do that. September, June, September, and whatever the other 3 months off from that are. In order to have this considered in September, they would require the ordinance in August, like I think August 9th or something like that. So even that would be the first possibility, and that is very much an aggressive schedule. But the Planning Commission would be, some of the work on the map has started. It began while we were developing the ordinance. And I think the Planning Commission, we've been in touch with our consultants from Lower Merion Conservancy and the Planning Commission. We have a further conversation with the state to make sure we understand the requirements and methodologies. We have a couple of volunteers from the Planning Commission who are eager to jump headlong into finalizing this material and bringing it back to council in June to show you that. So we'll see if they can do it, but that's almost what we'd have to do in order to have something that we could send them in August. So that, Mr. President, that would be the most aggressive schedule and the earliest we could actually seek to have this wrapped up. So that's for council to consider too. If you want to move quickly, that's kind of the pace we have to go at.
All right, message received. Thank you. We will aim to please. We'll move to information items.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Bressi. Thank you for your full show today.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Good night.
Just one information item I wanted to put into council members' minds. I know we have coming up here a discussion about our mask ordinance and how we may begin to transition as our community's public health needs change. Also a question of how much longer we shall continue meeting electronically and when we might return to meeting in the Borough Hall. So I'm just putting that bug in people's heads, that is members of Borough Council as well as members of the public. And I'm interested in hearing thoughts and feedback. I guess just we can talk about that at the next meeting. We'll move to committee reports. 9A, infrastructure.
Infrastructure did not meet last month.
Okay. Finance and administration.
FNA did not meet because I had a work commitment, and we really felt like we should just hold off till Ms. Bryan started, because we have laid out kind of a priority list and a program to get going when she comes. Just a quick informational item though, is, as you all know, the 4th of July committee has submitted their much earned retirement. And just as an FYI, finance and administration will be looking at in the future, how will we will reconsider or reevaluate per our resolution, the amount that we support the NBA, because you should be hearing an announcement of volunteer opportunities to keep our beloved traditions alive within the next few weeks. So we'll have a fuller report next month.
I have no doubt. Thank you. Public health and safety.
Okay, yeah, we did meet just before this meeting, and we had a couple updates from the EAC, including the installation of the electric car charging stations on Essex and behind the library. And the EAC would like to have a ribbon cutting of some kind when our new mayor, our new manager joins us. We're keeping our
mayor.
we're happy to keep our mayor. Yeah, no, when Samantha joins us, we would like to, maybe in June, have some sort of ribbon cutting. We discussed a number of matters with the police chief earlier tonight, including the training for the officers, anti-bias training, and we also have a number of projects on hold, awaiting the new manager. So the road sign review process, the signs in the parks, a question about outside dining, the plan for continuing or not with that. And then we did discuss also the mask ordinance and possibly repealing that. So Aaron, I don't know if you want to discuss that more now or.
Sure. I believe you have a resolution. We lost Councilor Elshaks. I believe you have a resolution to repeal the mask ordinance. Is that right? Yeah. Or to advertise the repeal of the mask ordinance. So we will actually add that after public comment. Council can't take any official action until there's been a public comment in the meeting. So just hold that thought, and we'll get to it in a few minutes. Our mayor, I know, is continuing to evaluate the basketball courts, but also the general state of emergency. The governor's state of emergency currently expires, I believe, May 20th. It may be extended, and we will work to sort of see how the various states of emergency continue to play into our ability to, make emergency decisions, spend funds in certain ways, and how it relates to our public health ordinances. All right. Anything else, Rob?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So now we'll move to public comment. I see a few members of the public here, and if you would like to comment, please unmute yourself. And Carol Marie Scanlon, you look like you've unmuted first. If you have a comment, just state your name and address for the record.
Yes, I do. Carol Marie Scanlon, Sabine Avenue. I have a comment about the historic ordinance, and I'd like to just bring to the council's attention that the historic ordinance on the page 5, section 5, talks about Borough Council may designate one or more areas of the borough as a historic district if it meets the definition, and it gives A through F on the definitions. There is one particular property in Narberth that has been very much the part of the heritage of Narberth since the early 1900s, when it was gifted to the borough, and then it was named Shand Field. It is currently the Sabine Park property, and what concerns me is that is very much part of the heritage of our town, considering it was given to the borough by a private citizen. It is historic. It has trees. The cherry trees were given to the borough by the 27th President of the United States in the Taft administration. And this this particular property should be considered as part of the historic district because of the history and the culture that it gives the borough. And I think it's a travesty. When I talked at the historic meeting last month, Todd Bressi said, well, parks don't count, and the borough can do with the parks whatever they want to. Well, that is a slap in the face to the historic preservation of this town's open space, as well as the historic preservation of town's history. So that's something I'm really concerned about. And as we talk about 201, at the last council meeting, at the very end of the meeting, Michelle asked about having another consultant come to Sabine, or to the 201 Sabine, to look at the financial picture of the building, I believe is how it was phrased. And my question is, Michelle, have you or has this council gone over the Yentis property manager reports from 2019, 20, or 21 to see how the money is being spent, and how the money going over that, how the money could be more efficiently spent before we hire another consultant? I mean, that to me is a waste of money to hire a consultant when we can look at those reports and see how they can play into the equation of the financials of the building.
All right,
And
thank you.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
Is the borough considering a saldo? That was discussed at the planning commission. And the saldo, it's been rejected by 2 prior councils, because I really feel if reading it over, it could work as a pay to play scheme, whereas builders could donate to certain projects and have concessions made. And I think it needs to be very, very carefully looked at before it is passed or before it is considered. And then I've been doing some research, and I have a question for Fred for the infrastructure meetings. There don't seem to be any minutes from the June 2019 to the December 2019. Are those available?
So I would address your questions about the saldo to the planning commission, because we don't have anything currently on the table in terms of a council action in that regard, or something being presented to us. As for the minutes, I will investigate that with Mr. Bush and the office, and we will figure out what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Callen.
No comment.
Thank you. Mr. Winston.
No comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move to agenda item 10.5, which would be a motion from Councilor McGreevy.
Okay, so I have language from the solicitor for a repeal of the mask ordinance, and I guess the discussion would be to vote to advertise or repeal the mask.
Could you say maybe make a motion and sort of read the to advertise the ordinance and read the language?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I have it here.
Great.
Okay, so I move that Borough Council vote to advertise an ordinance repealing Narberth Borough's temporary face covering ordinance and terminating Borough Council's emergency declaration.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Councilor Weisbord. And is there any discussion? Ms. Mayor.
So I raised a little bit of this discussion at the public safety meeting. Come May 31st, the governor has decided he's going to terminate all of the restrictions on that he's on everything except for the wearing of masks. And that is the one restriction he's going to maintain in place for public safety. And I know the CDC has recently updated their guidelines, whereas if you're vaccinated and you don't have to wear a mask outside. The trouble is, we're not sure, like with the basketball courts is one of the issues. We won't know who's vaccinated or not, whether they won't be able to, won't keep 6 feet of distance. There's certain situations where I could see it's very helpful. And I know the governor will keep his instructions to wear masks in place. However, there's no way to enforce that. Enforcement of that, it has little teeth. So it becomes a little bit more challenging to enforce it in that situation. So I just want to put it out there, in terms of public safety. So before we revoke it, I think it's something to consider.
Okay, thank you. And I will point out this is a motion to advertise, which gives council the opportunity at the June 2nd meeting of council to have further discussion and either decide, pro or con. But the way ordinances work, we need to take this step to get us to at least that decision-making point. Just make it clear to members of the public, we are not voting tonight to repeal the ordinance. We are voting to advertise a discussion on June 2nd to repeal the ordinance.
Yeah, and to follow on your point, Aaron, we wanted, I'm proposing this now because this would put us in line with the mayor's decision for the June 2nd date. So that we could line up our mask ordinance repeal with the mayor's decision if we wanted to, but we would have to move on this advertising now to do that.
Okay. Any other discussion, Councilor Rickards?
Rob, can I ask Public Health and Safety to request the data on mask enforcement prior to we make this decision? I'd like to understand what the level of enforcement currently is, because that'll help shape at least my evaluation for when we vote for the repeal.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can ask Chief Gallagher.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All in favor of advertising? Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Sorry, Mr. Kazan, I did not call on you during public comment. Did you have a request to make a public comment? No, you do not. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, council will, I'll take a motion to adjourn and then we'll go into executive session.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Seconded, okay. All right, we all in favor? Aye, meeting is over. Have a good evening. We're gonna go into executive session now.